have your Bibles, we're in Luke 11, Luke chapter 11, and we're going to begin reading here in just a moment at verse 37. I want to share with you tonight 6 marks of dead religion, or if you will, faith in formaldehyde. Most of us remember biology classes, whether it's in high school or college, where we look at specimens preserved in a jar of formaldehyde. I had the great misfortune of having to take biology. I took 2 classes of biology in high school, and then got into college, preacher school, and they had to maybe take another class of biology. I don't know what in the world else got to do with preaching, but I had to take a class of biology. But the chemical formula for formaldehyde is CH2O. It's in its basic form, it is a poisonous, pungent gas. But when in a solution, it becomes a very strong preservative used as embalming fluid and as a preservative for laboratory specimens. Biologists use formaldehyde because they can put a lifeless organism in it, and it keeps it looking alive for many years. Many of you, if you've ever smelled formaldehyde, you won't ever forget that smell. I had a couple of friends of mine in high school. They were helping out in the biology department there in high school, and they spilled a big old jar of formaldehyde all over them one time. Those boys stunk for 2 months after that. Just could not get it out of them. Not only their clothes, it's on their skin. Just couldn't get it off of them. But in our passage of Scripture today, folks, Jesus addressed a dead religion that appears to be alive, or if you will, faith in formaldehyde. His audience was some hyper-religious people called Pharisees and the teachers of the law, often called scribes. And these religious men were sort of like the Taliban today. They practiced their religion so strictly that they made life miserable for everyone around them. And Jesus got along great with the common people, but he was always having trouble with those religious folks. Mark Twain once wrote this. He said, "Having spent a considerable amount of time with religious people, I can understand why Jesus liked to be with tax collectors and sinners." Folks, before we get into what Jesus said, I want you to notice the reaction right off the bat. The reaction of his audience. This is Luke 11, this is verse 23. When Jesus left there, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law began to oppose him fiercely and to besiege him with questions, waiting to catch him in something that he might say. Some people assumed that Jesus was a nice, diplomatic gentleman who never said anything to upset anyone. When in fact, he so infuriated the religious crowd, they finally crucified him. Jesus didn't just come, folks, to comfort the afflicted. He came to afflict the comfortable. And this message may upset some people. May prefer your pastor would be one just to sort of a mild-mannered pastor who preach nice little sermonettes to nice little Christianettes. But I have to stay true to the Word. And I've always promised myself and the Lord and my congregation that I would stay true to the Word. And in this passage, folks, Jesus gives 6 very significant characteristics of dead religion. Dead religion. Just keep your Bibles up. We're going to be going through our text as we go through each point of this text. First one is this: your religion is dead if outward appearance is more important than inward or inner purity. Let's read verses 37 through 41. When Jesus finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. But the Pharisee, noticing that Jesus did not first wash before the meal, was surprised. Then the Lord said to him, "Now then, you Pharisees, clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness." Look what he calls them. He says, "You foolish people." Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But give what is inside the dish to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. Now, Jesus wasn't teaching anyone that you don't have to wash your hands before you eat. That's not what he was teaching. The Jewish practice of washing hands had nothing whatsoever to do with cleanliness. It was all about ceremony. The Pharisees went through a washing ritual before every meal just to show how religious they were. Their law said they had to use at least as much water as would fill 1 1/2 eggshell. That's how much water they would have to use. They would pour the water from their fingertips downward, rubbing the fist, each hand into their palm, and then they would pour the remaining water from their wrist downward, letting the water drip from their fingertips until it was all gone. It was just all ceremony, is all it was. Well, folks, when Jesus refused to observe this religious practice, his host was shocked. He accused the Pharisees of being so obsessed with outward appearance, but they ignored the inner purity that they should be concerned about. And he compared them to cups that were shiny and clean on the outside, but filthy and corrupt on the inside. This had always been God's position, always. He said through the prophet Isaiah over 750 years earlier, he said this in Isaiah 65, verse 5. These people say, stand by yourself, do not come near to me, for I am holier than you. These people are a smoke in my nose, a fire that burns all day long. By the way, folks, this verse here, this is where the origin of the phrase, holier than thou, came from this verse right here. God used it to mock their religious arrogance. But one danger of religion is that it makes you feel that you are superior to others because you practice certain rituals and they don't. But God is so irritated by this attitude that he compared it to smoke that gets in your nose. I ask you, folks, are you more concerned about your outward appearance than you are your inner purity? Which this is a very important principle that Jesus is teaching you. In fact, we find it also in 1 Samuel, chapter 16, verse 7. Samuel was looking for a new king, and all of David's older, stronger brothers were paraded before him. And Samuel said this, the Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. But that's powerful. Are you more interested in how you look on the outside than on the inside? Before you come to church on Sundays, you probably take a shower, right? Maybe even wash your hair, slip on some of your finest clothes. Why? Because you want to look good. But for whom? Who do you want to look good for? I mean, personally, I'm up here looking at all of you every Sunday. Thanks for looking good. I appreciate it. I really do. But it's because man does look on the outward appearance. And it's a lot easier on us up here when all you guys look good, and you always do. But God doesn't care about whether you look good or you're clean on the outside. He's more concerned about what's in your heart. See, folks, we can't see your heart, but God can. Some say they want to dress up nicely to go to church because God deserves their very best. Well, if that were really true, why don't we all just wear tuxedos, men, and you ladies just wear a formal gown every Sunday, if that's true? If you can demonstrate your love to God by what you wear on the outside, why don't all of us guys buy $3,000 Italian suits, and why don't all you ladies all wear the kind of beautiful dresses that the Rose Queens wear, or the Duchess wear, and things like that? Now, does that mean that you don't love God as much as if you wear something you bought at Walmart instead of an upscale store somewhere? Maybe you bought it at Target or something like that? See, folks, God is able to see deeper than our shirts or even our skin. He can see our hearts. For some people, the most spiritual thing they do is get dressed up for church, unfortunately. Years ago, Amy Grant recorded a song that went something like this. I want to share it with you. She said, I know a man, maybe you know him too. You never can tell, he might even be you. He knelt at the altar, and that was the end. He's saved, and that's all that matters to him. His spiritual tummy, it can't take too much. One day a week, he gets his spiritual lunch. On Sunday, he puts on his spiritual best and gives his language a spiritual rest. Sadly, folks, that describes the attitude of many who think dressing up can hide an impure heart. To a person who is hanging on to a dead religion, their heart may be corrupt, but externals are important to them. They can go out on a Saturday night and sow wild oats, because then they'll dress up and attend church on Sunday and pray for a crop failure. But that's faith in formaldehyde. It really is. The second mark I want to show to you, or a dead religion, is that your religion is dead if ritual acts are more important than a personal relationship with God. Look at verse 42. Verse 42. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. Because these Pharisees were so conscientious about in their observance that they didn't just tithe their money, they even tithed their herbs that they grew in their gardens. Long before God gave the Ten Commandments, he instituted the principle of giving him the first and finest 10% of everything we produce. Some people say tithing is not taught in the New Testament. But folks, in this verse right here, Jesus put his stamp of approval on it. He says when it comes to tithing, it should not be left undone. That's the same thing as saying it should be done. Because I believe, and I teach, and I practice that at least the first 10% of a Christian's income should be returned to the Lord through the local church. Without a doubt, Jesus affirmed tithing. But the point of his statement has more to do with what they weren't doing. They didn't practice justice, nor did they demonstrate God's love. It's so easy to get wrapped up doing religious acts that we forget really important things. In the 21st century, we have our own little rituals. For some, as we've said, it may be getting up and getting dressed and parking in the same parking space and sitting in the same chair every Sunday morning and leaving church without meeting God. Even your offering can become a ritual if you give it without a heart of joy and thankfulness to God. For others, reciting the Lord's Prayer or that memorized prayer that you mumble before you eat can become a ritual. We like rituals because they make us feel good about ourselves. But God is interested in so much more than our rituals. He wants to have a loving relationship with each and every one of us. That's what he said to the prophet Micah. In Micah chapter 6, verse 8, he said this. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, friends, the only way you can walk humbly with God is to have a personal relationship with him. Whenever I think of walking with God, I always think of how it was in the Garden of Eden before sin invaded that perfect place. We read in Genesis 3 that God walked in the garden in the cool of the evening. And Adam and Eve walked with him until they sinned. And then they hid after that. Folks, do you have a daily sense that you are walking and talking with God every single day? Now, religion always keeps God at a safe distance. But in Jesus, we can boldly approach the throne of grace. Like the old hymn says, the old hymn, In the Garden. Love this old hymn. My dad, unlike me, he had a singing voice. Beautiful singing voice. And he would oftentimes sing this as a solo, as a special. I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses. And the voice I hear, falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. He speaks, the sound of his voice, so sweet the birds hush their singing. And the melody that he gave to me, within my heart is ringing. He walks with me, and he talks with me. And he tells me that I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Isn't that beautiful? Folks, religion can't say that. Religion can't say that. Here's the third mark of a dead religion. That is that your religion is dead if being seen by others is more important than serving God. Verse 43 and 44. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces. Woe to you, because you are like unmarked graves, which men walk over without knowing it. You have to understand, folks, in the synagogue, the front seats in the synagogue were reserved for the most respected Pharisees. And you have to understand, they were like these seats. They were seats that were facing the congregation. So they were facing everyone else. And to be asked to sit in one of those seats was an honor. And out in the marketplace, the most religious Pharisees were greeted with a loud voice, and their position and title was always announced. I heard about a man once, and he said, I go to church, but I don't consider myself to be a Christian. He said, I believe in God, but I mainly go to church to see and to be seen. He felt attending church was good for his standing in the community, and it was good for his business. That's a guy who admitted he was holding on to dead religion. We have many people like that today. Not so much in our church, but if you go to some of the bigger churches, a lot of people would go to some of the bigger churches to make contacts for their business. They often do that. Always have. Just been a part of it. Jesus warned against performing religious acts just to be seen by others. He said this in Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. He says, be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues or on the streets to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received the reward in full. Folks, if you serve others just so people will notice how good you are, you have the wrong motive. People may applaud your good works, but human applause, my friends, is the only reward that you're going to receive. Our motive should be to serve God with no desire whatsoever for recognition and honor. Even when our motive is pure, sometimes you're noticed and you're honored. And when that happens, just pass all that honor and all that glory to Jesus Christ. In verse 44, Jesus mentioned unmarked graves. See, if a Jew walked on a grave, they were rendered ceremonially unclean and had to go through a ritual cleansing. An unmarked grave was almost as dangerous as a hidden mine, because they might be rendered ceremonially unclean by just inadvertently stepping on that grave, on that ground. Jesus said these religious Pharisees were like unmarked graves. Without even knowing it, their attitude was causing others to become unclean. They were trying to make people religious, but they were actually driving them away from the Lord. See, friends, religion can become fatal. It's allowed to be a substitute for knowing God. For instance, there's nothing wrong with brushing your hair. But if you decided to substitute brushing your hair for breathing, brushing your hair would kill you in about 7 minutes. There's nothing wrong with performing acts of kindness. But if religious acts are done to be seen by others, and they become a substitute for knowing God, they can become eternally fatal. Here's the fourth mark of a dead religion. Your religion is dead if rigid rules are more important than love that liberates. Verse 45 and 46. One of the experts in the law answered him, "Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us also." And Jesus replied, "And you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them." These legal experts were also called scribes. And like judges today, their job is to interpret the Old Testament law and to officially rule on what could and could not be done. Through the years, the scribes added thousands of pages of laws to the written Old Testament. See, a good Jew was expected to obey all of them. How about a burden to have to carry day in and day out? In modern terms, Jesus was telling the experts in the law to lighten up a little bit. Through the years, I've off and on, I used to use it quite a bit when I worked with youth. Used Campus Crusade, and they got a little witnessing tool, or used to have. It's an oldie goldie called the 4 Spiritual Laws. And you ask somebody, well, have you heard of these 4 spiritual laws? Well, not these hyper-religious scribes. They would walk up to somebody and ask, well, have you heard of the 4,962 spiritual laws? That's how many they had. But dead religion produces faith to a long list of rules and regulations. And God had something to say about it through Isaiah. Look what Isaiah said. This is Isaiah 29, verse 13. "These people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is made up of rules taught by men." See, folks, in addition to all the laws, they had plenty of loopholes too. For instance, it was against Jewish law to carry a load on the Sabbath. But notice how the lawyers got around that law.